Well, Turkey's military pension fund Oyak has signed a provisional deal to take over British Steel as it plans to expand its footprint in the steel industry. The move comes after the UK steelmaker was forced into compulsory liquidation in May, following months of financial pressures. The deal could save around 5,000 jobs and is expected to close by the end of the year. Well, for more on the story, let's speak to Richard Warren in London. He's the Head of Policy and Representation at UK Steel, an industry group representing British steelmakers. Welcome to the program, Richard. Now, what's your reaction to this tentative deal?
It's undoubtedly a positive announcement. If you think about the situation British Steel was in 3 months ago, going into liquidation, an extreme amount of uncertainty and concern for the steel sector, but obviously most importantly the workers at the site in Scunthorpe. So now 3 months on, be looking at a situation where hopefully we are moving towards a permanent solution to the issue. It's undoubtedly extremely positive from our perspective.
Yeah, so as we know, the Turkish pension fund now has the exclusive rights to do its due diligence on British Steel. But if the deal does go through, what would this mean for the UK's steel industry as a whole?
So obviously we're not subject to the discussions that are ongoing between ATA Holding and the British government, or obviously the official receiver that is overseeing this purchase. What we do know is obviously from this statement that ATA Holding put out today is their plans for the site are obviously to put investment in there to increase capacity and to perhaps even look at lower carbon forms of steelmaking. It's been a long-term objective of the UK steel industry to increase its capacity, to increase its production and to start actually supplying more of the domestic demand for steel in the UK. If the initial soundings that we have from ATA Holding for the future of the steel site and for future investment come to fruition, is undoubtedly a hugely positive development.
Yes, and British Steel went into receivership when talks with the government broke down back in May. Do you think there is a bigger role for the government to play here? Should they be doing more to support the UK steel industry?
So there's clearly a role both in the purchase of British Steel and obviously we've had reports in the media about the development of a package of support that would be forthcoming from the government. We obviously have no details of that as of yet, but we would expect to see public statements being made during the next 1 to 2 months. There's also, and as we've said in the press today, there is a bigger role for government to play for the overall steel sector. Clearly, the government has had a very high level of involvement in the purchase of British Steel, but it mustn't lose sight of the bigger picture from our perspective. And the key message we say to government, and we will continue to say, is you need to get the fundamentals of the business environment right in the UK. And the big things that are affecting the steel sector at the minute and are holding them back from its full potential and a sustainable future are things like, obviously, Brexit. We need to have access, tariff-free access to our biggest market, which is the European Union. 1/3 of total steel production from the UK goes straight to the European Union. Secondly, our energy costs in the UK, they remain hideously uncompetitive. We pay 50% more for our electricity in the UK than in Germany and 100% more than in France. When you're using the volumes of electricity and energy that steel sites do, you need to get those fundamentals correct. The third thing that continues to hold investment back is business rates. We pay 5 to 10 times as much for business rates, a local form of taxation in the UK, than our counterparts in countries like the Netherlands, France and Germany, and that is holding back investment. And what we say to government is clearly the measures they're taking around the British Steel sale are necessary and are very welcome, but you need to get the fundamentals of the business environment right for the whole of the steel sector.
Yes, and the UK does have quite a long history of steel manufacturing, doesn't it? But how is it faring against cheaper producers like China?
There's undoubtedly been an issue from imports from places like China, and that probably peaked in 2015, 2016, when there was a real overcapacity globally of steel production. We have seen that overcapacity reduce slightly, but perhaps the biggest thing that's helped, not just at a UK level, but at an EU level and further afield in places like the US, is authorities being far tougher when it comes to tariffs like trade remedies, or what we call trade defence measures. And there's been a whole slew of them introduced against subsidised or dumped steel in the European Union, and that has made a real difference. We've seen imports from China go down by 50% over the last 2 to 3 years, and that is starting to make a real difference. That, however, that's a short-term sticking plaster. We cannot rely on that in the long term. And the biggest issue is overcapacity of steel, which fundamentally does come from continued state support and subsidies in places like China. And the only way of dealing with that in the long term is through organisations like the OECD that really start to tackle the causes behind that and actually start to get governments across the world to stop subsidising their steel exports.
Okay, and we'll be keeping a close eye on how this deal progresses. Richard Warren, thank you so much for your time.